What's up, YouTube? Today I'll be going over my Rick Steadfast Leader Commander deck. Rick is a 3/4 human soldier for 2 colorless and 2 white mana, and has the abilities when he enters the battlefield, choose 2 from among First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink. Humans you control have each of the chosen abilities, and as long as you control 4 or more humans you control get +2/+2. So I built this around human soldiers. So let's get into it. Starting with the creatures, we have Catapult Master, a 3/3 for 5 human soldier. I know it says Soldier Lord, but it has been errated to say human soldier. It has the ability tap 5 untapped soldiers you control, remove target creature from the game. Very powerful. Next we have Daru Warchief. It is also a human soldier. It has soldier spells cost 1 less to play, and soldiers get +2/+1. So it's a lord for us. Next up we have Keeper of the Accord. Very fun card. It's a 4-drop 3/4 human soldier. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player controls more creatures than we do, we create a 1/1 human soldier token. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, if that player controls more lands than we do, we get to search our library for a basic land card, put it into play tapped, shuffle our library. So this helps us keep ramped up because white has little ramp outside of mana rocks. Next we have Veteran Armorer. Gives our creatures +0/+1. Help keep the toughness up. We have Veteran Armor Smith, which does the same thing, except this is for only soldiers, giving them +0/+1. Then we have Thalia's Lieutenant. When it enters, it puts a 1/1 counter on each other human we control, and whenever a human enters the battlefield under our control, we put a 1/1 counter on Thalia's Lieutenant. Next up we have Aven Mind Sensor. To stop our opponents from searching their library, they can only search the top 4 cards of their library. Next up we have Audric Lunarch Marshal. He has, at the beginning of combat, creatures we control get first strike until end of turn if a creature we control has first strike. The same is true for flying, death touch, double strike, haste, hexproof, indestructible, lifelink, menace, reach, skulk, trample, and vigilance. So as long as one of our creatures has any of those keywords, at the beginning of each combat, all of our creatures get that keyword, as long as he's out. Next up we have Hero of Bladehold, that has Battle Cry. Whenever it attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and when it attacks, it makes 2/1/1 white soldiers tapped in attacking. Now it's not a soldier, but it's a human, and it makes soldiers. Next up we have a very powerful card, the Evangel of Heliod. When it enters the battlefield, we put a number of 1/1 soldiers into play where X, I guess, is the number of equal to our devotion to white. So for each white mana symbol in a permanent's casting cost, that counts to our total devotion. So this can get us a ton of creatures when it comes down. And then we have the Revelant Hoplite, which is basically the same thing, except it makes 1/1 white human soldiers instead of just soldiers. Next up we have Veteran Swordsmith to give our soldiers +1/+0. Then we have Ballyrush Banneret to make Kithkins and soldier spells 1 less to play. We have the Palace Jailer. When he ETBs, we become the Monarch, and he gets to exile target creature an opponent controls until an opponent becomes the Monarch. So it can get rid of something for a little bit. Next up we have Soul's Attendant. Whenever a creature ETBs, we may gain a life. This is important. This is a may ability, not a must. Versus Soul Warden, who is a must enter the battlefield. If you forget a Soul Warden trigger, you don't gain the life. If you miss a Soul's Attendant trigger, you don't gain the life. If you miss a Soul Warden, you still do because it's a must-happen trigger. Next up, we have Tithe Taker, making spells and abilities our opponent's spells cost 1 more to cast and abilities cost 1 more to cast when it's not their turn, unless they're mana abilities. Or it's actually during our turn, not their turn. And then when he dies, he replaces himself with a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying. Next up, we have Intrepid Hero, who can tap to destroy a creature with power 4 or greater. Very useful. Then we have Frontline Medic. Whenever it and at least 2 other creatures attack, creatures we control are indestructible this turn. And then we can sacrifice it to counter a spell with X in its converted mana cost, unless that controller pays 3. We have Knight Captain of Eos. When it enters, it makes 2/1/1 white soldiers tokens. And then for a white, we can sacrifice a soldier to prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Very fun card, very political card. You can be like, you know what, I'm going to save you from being killed by my opponent by just sacrificing a soldier. Next up, we have Captain of the Watch. It has Vigilance, gives our soldiers +1/+1 and Vigilance. And when Captain of the Watch enters the battlefield, it makes 3 1/1 white soldier tokens. Then we have Archetype of Courage. Gives our creatures first strike, and our creatures our opponent controls lose first strike and cannot have or gain first strike. So very helpful against most decks. Against decks that are heavy double strike, not super helpful. Audric, Master Tactician. Whenever him and at least 3 other creatures attack, we get to choose which creatures block and how creatures block. So basically, when he attacks with a bunch of creatures, we can choose to let them all go through and not have our opponents block anything. Next up is Mirror Entity. It's a changeling, so it has every creature type at all times. And then for X, we can turn all creatures we control into base power XX until end of turn. So very helpful. We can swing with it. And then say our opponents don't block, dump all our mana to make our creatures huge. Next we have Paragon of New Dawns, another Lord. Gives our white creatures we control +1/+1, and then it can give another target white creature Vigilance until end of turn. We have Field Marshal, who's yet another Lord, who gives our creatures other soldiers +1/+1 and first strike. And then for the last creature of the deck, we have Palace Sentinels, just to give us the Monarch so we can keep drawing cards, because that's one of our weakest spots. Going into artifacts now, we have Heraldic Banner. When it ETBs, we choose a color, and since we're a monocolor deck, we're always choosing white. And then creatures of the chosen color get +1/+0, so it's a semi-lord, and it can tap for 1 mana of the chosen color. Next up, we have Stoneforge Masterwork. When it is equipped to a creature, that creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature we control that shares a type with it. So usually we're going to attach it to a soldier. They're going to get +X+X, where X is a lot. We have Heirloom Blade, giving a equipped creature +3/+1, and when it dies, we may reveal cards from the top of our library until we reveal a creature card that shares a creature type with it, put it into our hand, and the rest on the bottom in a random order. Very helpful, especially since we have a lot of tokens. Token dies, we can get a creature out of our deck. Next up, we have Cage Sun. When it enters the battlefield, we choose a color. We're going to be choosing white. Creatures of the chosen color get +1/+1. Creatures we control. And then lands that cause us to add 1 or more mana of the chosen color, add an additional mana. Very helpful for ramping. Next up, we have Herald's Horn. We're going to be choosing soldiers every time this enters the battlefield. Makes soldier spells cost 1 less. And at the beginning of our upkeep, we can look at the top card of our library. If it's a soldier, we can reveal it, put it into our hands. Now, the reason why I say soldier instead of the creature type is because we're only choosing soldier when we cast it. Next up, we have Endless Atlas. This is a fun card. For 2 mana, we can draw a card. We can only activate this if we can control 3 or more lands with the same name. Monocolored deck, most of our lands are plains. So, basically 2 mana draw card. Next up, we have Icon of Ancestry. Again, choosing soldiers. Because it can choose any creature type when it enters the battlefield. Creatures of the chosen type get +1/+1, and then for 3 mana, we can look at the top 3 cards of our libraries. We may reveal a creature card from among them that it shares a type with the chosen type. Put it into our hand. The rest go on the bottom in a random order. Getting into the enchantments now. Smothering Tithe, because this is just really, really powerful. Whenever opponent draws a card, they either pay 2 mana or we get a treasure. Next up, we have land tax. At the beginning of our upkeep, if an opponent controls more lands than us, we may search our library for up to 3 basic land cards, reveal them, put them into our hand, shuffle our library. Very helpful to help us ramp, especially if we're going second on turn 1. Next up, we have Honor of the Pure to give our white creatures +1/+1. Mobilization, giving our soldiers vigilance. And for 3 mana, we can make a 1/1 white soldier token. Cathar's Crusade, because we have so many ways to make tokens, and we play a lot of creatures that whenever a creature enters the battlefield, we put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control. Our creatures can get insanely huge, insanely fast. Next up, Brave the Sands. Creatures we control have vigilance, and each creature can block an additional creature. Helpful because our one soldier token can now block 2 creatures instead of only 1. Last enchantment is our Radiant Destinies. Has Ascend, so if we control 10 permanents, we get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. As long as, or when it enters the battlefield, we choose a creature type. Again, soldiers. Creatures of the chosen type get +1/+1, and if we have the City's Blessing, they also have vigilance. Going into our instance now, we have Return to Dust to exile target artifact or enchantment, and if we're casting it during one of our main phases, we exile 2 artifacts and or enchantments instead. Raise the Alarm to make 2 white soldiers. Swords to Plowshares to exile a creature. Unbreakable Formation to give our creatures indestructible, and if it's cast during our main phase, we put a 1/1 counter on each of those creatures, and they gain vigilance until end of turn. Next, we have Condemn, which is put a target attacking creature on the bottom of its owner's library. Then we have Disenchant, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Path to Exile, exile a creature. An opponent searches their library for a basic land card, put it into play tapped. Using that to get rid of creatures. Then we have Brave the Elements. It is choose a color. White creatures you control have protection from the chosen color until end of turn. Very helpful combat trick. Next up, Heliod's Intervention. We can either choose to destroy X artifacts or enchantments, or target player gains twice X life. Usually using it to blow up artifacts and enchantments. Then we have Oblation to shuffle a non-land permanent into its owner's library, and then they draw 2 cards. So kind of like Chaos Warp, but instead of flipping the top card, they just draw 2. Sometimes we use that on our own permanents just to draw 2 cards. Next up, we have Call of the Coppercoats. It has Strive, so we can cast this spell for an additional 1/1 white to choose a target beyond the first. Choose any number of target opponents. Create X 1/1 white human soldier tokens, where X is the total number of creatures those opponents control. So if we're going against another token deck, cast this, get a whole bunch of tokens. Next up, make a stand to give our creatures +1/+0 and indestructible until end of turn. to avoid board wipes. Then we have Generous Gift. To destroy a permanent, its controller makes a 3/3 green elephant. More removal. And then our last instant is Teferi's Protection. This is the Secret Lair extra life. Until end of turn, our life total cannot change. We gain protection from everything. All permanents we control phase out. And then we exile Teferi's Protection after it resolves. Going into our sorceries, we have Hour of Revelation. Destroy all non-land permanents. It costs 3 less if there are 10 or more permanents on the battlefield. Most of our sorceries are just board wipes. We have Austere Command, where we can choose to destroy all artifacts, all enchantments, all creatures with CMC 3 or less, or 4 or greater. We can choose any 2 of these. Very helpful. Next up, we have Gift of the Estates. If an opponent controls more lands than us, we search our library for up to 3 plains cards, reveal them, put them into our hand, shuffle our library. This does not specify that they have to be basic, so we can go get one of our 1 non-basic plains. Next up, we have Cleansing Nova. We can either destroy all creatures or destroy all artifacts and enchantments. Just another board wipe. Next up, one of my favorite board wipes, Tragic Arrogance. For each player, we choose from among permanents that player controls an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a planeswalker. Then each player sacrifices all other non-land permanents he or she controls. So basically, we cast this, we choose what stays and what gets sacrificed. And the key thing why I like it, besides the fact that we get to choose what stays, is it's sacrificing, not destroy, so it gets around that indestructible. Next up, another one of my favorite board wipes is Winds of Abandon. We get to exile a creature we don't control. For each creature exiled this way, its controller searches their library for a basic land card, put those lands into play tapped, then shuffle their library, and for 6 mana, we can cast it for its overload cost, changing the text from target to each. So usually we're casting it for 6 mana, exiling all creatures we don't control. Their controller can get lands. Next up, Martial Coup. We can pay X into it to get X 1/1 white soldier tokens. And if X is 5 or more, we destroy all other creatures. So basically, if we have 7 mana, it's make 5/1/1s and destroy everything else. And our only Planeswalker we run is Elspeth's Fun's Champion. For an uptick, we get 3 1/1 white soldier tokens. -3, we destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. And -7, creatures we control get +2/+2 and have flying, and that's an emblem. Now, if you notice, this and a few other cards look not like real cards. That's because they're proxies, because the real one is in another deck at the moment. Going into our lands, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 basic planes. And then for non-basics, we have Daru Encampment. Tap to add a colorless, or for a white, we can give a soldier +1/+1. Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx. We add a colorless, or for 2, we add a color. We choose a color, we add mana equal to our devotion to that color to our mana pool. Very good card, especially since we have a lot of permanents. Fabled Passage, just a fetch land to go get a basic. Castle Ardenvale, because I wanted to try it out. For 4 mana, we can make a 1/1 white human token. Otherwise, it just taps for a white. Secluded Step, or Blighted Step, very fun card, because for 4 mana, we sacrifice it. We gain 2 life for each creature we control. Usually we're flooding the board, so we can gain a lot of life off of that card. Next up, I thought I'd try War Room in the deck. For 3 mana, we pay life equal to our commander's color identity, which is white. So for 3 mana and 1 life, we draw a card because we need a lot of draw power in this. Next up, we have Karoo. It comes into play tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, we return a untapped plains to our hand, or we sacrifice Karoo. It taps to add 1 white and 1 colorless to our mana pool. Next up, we have Foreboding Watchtower. It ETBs tapped. It adds a white mana to our mana pool, or for 2, it becomes a 1/5 white creature token, or white creature until end of turn, and it's still a land. Drifting Meadow is just a land that ETBs tapped, and we can cycle it for 2 mana to draw a card. Secluded Steppe, almost the same thing, except it has cycling for 1 white instead of 2 generic mana. Next up, we have Path of Ancestry. We can tap to add 1 mana of any color of our commander's identity, so tap for 1 white. Then if that mana is spent to cast a creature spell that shares a type with our commander, we scry 1. Every creature in our deck shares a type with our commander. Next up, we have Windbrisk Heights, the hideaway land. When it enters, we look at the top 4, put 1 card into exile, face down, then put the rest on the bottom of our library. For 1 white and tapping it, we may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if we attacked with 3 or more creatures this turn. So very helpful for casting some of our big spells early. And then our only non-basic plains, Mistveil Plains. It enters tapped, and for 1 white, we can put target card from our graveyard on the bottom of our library, but we can only activate this if we have 2 or more white permanents. This is very helpful for returning some of our more valuable cards when they get destroyed to have a chance to draw them. So yeah, that is my Rick the Steadfast Leader EDH deck. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Comment down below if you have any suggestions on cards I should put in or take out. That'd be great. Subscribe if you want to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.